elections were organized in an efficient and transparent manner, and voters participated freely in large numbers. Bottom line, this was a free, fair, transparent election. So why all the noise from the NDC, you may ask? We'll ask them very shortly. And this is the verdict that goes international, because all the international community will be reading this. Remember that the NDC had raised concerns with a whole host of issues with election procedure, the Supreme Court. They've actually met the diplomatic community to register their concerns with them. John Mahama had raised those concerns with members of the diplomatic community. But this is, in essence, a reflection of what they may be thinking in print. And so we'll talk about what its implications are for the NDC itself going forward. They identified some gaps, though, in terms of no provision in the legal framework defining an election campaign period. And this is the broad recommendations that the EU was making on the electoral system, our democratic system generally, which is something that they are touched on. So campaign finance is an area they want us to look into, specific media regulations covering campaigns, behavior of political parties and candidates during the campaigns themselves. Now, they also talk about the adult suffrage, and they say there are marked disparities in the number of registered voters per constituency, undermining equal suffrage. And if you look at the analysis they've done, of the 275 constituencies, 204, that is 74%, deviates, according to them, more than 15% from the national average of 61,256 voters per constituency. This is something that they want the EC to correct. Now, we had a discussion recently about the Saul case, which went to the Supreme Court, and a final verdict was pronounced on that recently. Now, the Commission, the EU delegation, is making the point about this, and they're talking about the fact that these areas did not get a chance to vote. And remember that the Supreme Court had affirmed it. And so the road ended for them almost a couple of weeks back. Now, the EC's national, regional, and district structures, and this is directly in opposition to what we've seen from the NDC, saying the word competent was used. The NDC uses the word incompetent. And so the EU's position on the EC verdict and the EC and that of the NDC is opposed to each other. So how do you reconcile those two positions? We'll get into that. They say the EC was well-resourced and transparent. NDC will tell you that's not the case. Okay, we'll get into that very shortly. The campaigns themselves across all 16 regions, the observers noted that the high visibility of the presidential campaigns, both NDC and MPP, you see the disparities there with these two parties and the rest of the field. This is some of the key things that they are proposing, and I doubt if NDC will disagree that the NCA power to control the media space should be limited. Give that content regulation issue to NMC, and we've seen many pro-NDC stations just before the elections close. Some of them are still off air right now. The EU Observer Mission say that is something that should be looked at. They get legal framework, provide the NMC with sufficient resources to conduct media monitoring. They do some forms of this, but they say, let's do more of that. And the mandate of the Data Protection Commission also has come into play here in terms of what they're proposing. Women and the European Union, they're very key on this. Most parties have proposed that they will do this, 30%, but EU says, let's do this and then aim to progressively move to 50%. The thing is, the parties all put 30%, but they haven't really achieved that yet in terms of dealing with gender equality in representation in this country. Also, establish an inclusive mechanism for cross-party involvement, and this is key, in the selection and approval of the EC members, the chairperson, because he identified that as part of the fundamental problems why we consistently have contest over who the EC chairperson is. They also say, put a limit on their tenure. Don't make it limitless as it is right now, that they just get there and they almost are in that place until they retire. Put a limit on it. I'll ask my guests tonight what they make of that recommendation. The candidate nomination deposits. The EU says it is too expensive, outrageously too expensive, reduce the cost. By the way, the NDC must receive some refunds. I wonder if they have. I'll check with the NDC rep who is joining us tonight, Peter Bomotukuno, because if you hit a certain threshold, the EC is supposed to give you a certain refund of the money that you paid. We'll get into that shortly and get a clarification on that. Also, intensify civic education, which is key because we know focusing on what constitutes an electoral offense. Many people spoil ballots has been a key issue. We are going to get into these matters tonight now that we are getting the international verdict on our elections that was held more than 4 months ago. This is how the rest of the world will see us through this lens. Regardless of what we say locally, this is how the rest of the world is going to see us. And this is going to influence a lot of the rankings that we see, democracy rankings, sometimes freedom of the press rankings, etc. And when they are dealing with us, they'll look at this and check and see if your democracy is working. It influences a lot of the donor support you receive. So there are wide, serious implications for EU Observer Mission reports. And that is why this is a subject of our conversation tonight. We'll get into that here on PM Express after the break. And thank you very much for joining us here on PM Express tonight. And of course, we're having a conversation, as I laid out before for you, on the EU Observer Missions report. It's a very controversial one because, of course, the main opposition party has vehemently expressed its objections to some of its findings. And so tonight we're going to look into that and examine its basis of it. Because as I indicated at my intro, it has serious implications for the country. And that's why you don't take such reports for granted. This is, in essence, the international community will judge us largely based on this report. Regardless of what we say locally, this is how they're going to look at that. When they're going to deal with you, one of the reports they'll be referring to in their dealings with Ghana will be this. Primary amongst them is this, because elections are everything. Was it free? Was it fair? Was it peaceful? They'll look at that. And that verdict will determine their dealings with you in large part. So this has investment implications for us. Businesses outside the country looking to do foreign direct investment, for example, will, in the assessment of where to put their money, will bring it here because they will look at EU Observer Missions report as one of the bases of making that decision. And I'm pretty sure you've heard that Twitter is setting up a major center here in Ghana. Part of the consideration will be this report. So this is big deal, what we are talking about. It's not something that you could just say, disregard. It is significant that the entire European Union Observer Mission is saying this about a country is important. That is the context within which we are having this conversation. And so if you're just joining us, welcome. My guest tonight in the studio is Peter Bomotukuno. He's the NDC Deputy General Secretary. You probably would have seen him leading a lot of the conversations from the NDC side when it came to assessing the overall conduct of the polls and the processes leading to the polls. Joining us also from the NPP is the General Secretary himself, John Buru, who together with his other executives have been touring the country. Mr. Buru, nice to see you and great to see that you're looking well.
Thank you very much.
Also joining me is Paul Nana Kwabena Abrampa Mensah. He's a Senior Programs Officer of the Ghana Center for Democratic Development at the CDD. And I know the EU Observer Mission, they are meeting both political parties. They are meeting even CDD. Mr. Abrampa, you can confirm that. I understand that they're meeting civil society groups also, correct?
Yes, the mission is meeting CDD Ghana tomorrow morning at 10 a.m.
Yeah, great. And the reason why this is so broad in terms of the consultations is exactly the point I made earlier. Because once they finalize this and they publish it, it's worldwide. The globe looks at that, Ghana, through that prism. And let me bring in Peter Bomotukuno. Let's start with that significance. How important is the EU Observer Mission report in the broader context of geopolitics?
Well, first of all, Evans, let's look at the importance of observer missions in general.
and the role they play, and perhaps what drives observer missions to spend a lot of money to come into our countries. We all agree, I mean, commonplace, that every election is supposed to be free and fair and peaceful. So those are guiding principles that guide these observer missions, to come and observe and see whether the elections that were conducted were free, fair, and peaceful. So all modalities, all tools, monitoring tools that are used are supposed to elucidate this, three principles. If you look at this report that has been prepared, it's a very significant report, as you said. It plays critical role in the international space, in the diplomatic circles. So it is very important that such reports become very accurate and represents what's actually happened in the election.
You say it's not accurate?
Yes, we have raised various concerns, very critical concerns about this report. We have not hesitated to express our disquiet about how the report was prepared. Perhaps the entire modalities that they used, the monitoring tools that were used to do this particular report. We saw the 2020 elections as one of the worst elections in the history of this country, by way of procedure, by way of security, by the conduct of the elections, and even after the elections, how we manage the elections. It has been the poorest, and I think that is a very, glim picture of what our democracy is supposed to have.
The independent observers disagree. The elections were organized in an efficient and transparent manner. Voters participated freely in large numbers. The polls were competitive. It was free and fair. This is a verdict. So
just to disprove all the commentary that you have given, we would go into the report. Now, this report has been segmented into three parts. Before the elections, electoral activities before the elections, during the elections, and after the elections. Now, if you look at electoral activities before the elections, they spoke about the legal framework. You saw the brouhaha that came with the formulation of the CI. There's an established procedure that the Electoral Commission used. We, those at IPAC, are consulted in preparing those legal frameworks. We have a subcommittee of IPAC that is represented by other political parties. I mean, the two main political parties and one representing the smaller political parties, engaging with the legal team of the EC, preparing the CI and sending it to Parliament. That has been the practice since 1992, perhaps if you want 1996. Now you have the case whereby these constitutional instruments, these legal instruments were prepared without political parties. It was never discussed at IPAC. It actually went to Parliament on the blind side of all political parties. Actually, if you look at the procedure, they actually went through the back door even in Parliament. That is where they encountered several problems and they had to go back and forth 3 times before the instrument was properly laid. So that problem itself is something that was supposed to be reported by the EU. They failed to accurately report and discuss all the issues, all the steps that were skipped by the Electoral Commission.
Can I quote something to you?
The flaws.
Let me quote something from the report on this matter. The EC also organized at national level regular IPAC meetings attended by representatives of the EC and contesting political parties as well as by civil society. And here's an important bit. The frequency of IPAC meetings increased significantly in the immediate pre-election period. However, the opposition parties criticized the lack of consultation during these meetings. Here's the thing. The observer mission says it increased. And then he tells you, well, you say, and the NDC has said, we're criticizing it. It appears that the conclusion there is, which is what they say, the frequency of IPAC meetings increased. Which is exactly the point you make.
Whilst I don't dispute the fact that the frequency of IPAC meetings increased, IPAC meetings in itself and the frequency does not in any way mean that the Electoral Commission is being listening or being consultative. Because most of the meetings, you and I, recall that most of the times I expressed disquiet about the fact that they will call us and tell us that, okay, we just invited you to say this to you. You understand? The modalities of even running the meetings were the problem. But let's not deviate. We are talking about legal instruments and the legal framework for the elections, a significant pillar upon which the EU has made recommendations. And I'm saying that the problems that arose as a result of the discussions and the preparation for these constitutional instruments were not adequately captured. And for that matter, any recommendation that would be based on the legal framework may be defective somehow, because all those activities put together will tell you whether the Electoral Commission was being fair in the preparations of the law. You would recall that we raised significant problems with the exclusion of the voter ID card, the previous voter ID card, the birth certificates, and other equally important identification instruments. We went to court, it was thrown away. Now, the passport and the Ghana card were the only identification documents that were used. We thought that even before it went to Parliament, IPAC should have discussed extensively and come to a fair conclusion and agreement.
That wasn't done, you are left.
That wasn't done.
And you say
so we believe that the EU, looking at this very critical matter, which we engaged the EU on, we did several meetings with
before
them.
They finished the report?
And not even the EU, before they finished during that time and before they finished the report. And not only the EU, we engaged different international organizations, led by the flag bearer himself. We raised all these critical concerns. So flowing from those disquiets that we expressed, the displeasure that we expressed, perhaps it should find space in determining whether that particular...
Doesn't that say to you that they disbelieved the claims you were making? That they didn't find your claims credible enough to find space in the final report?
Well, that is up to them. Perhaps they should have shown that in the report, that, okay, we gave them all the sides of the story. We did a lot of noise. We went all over.
But they found evidence that contradicted. Hold on for me. Let me bring you other guests. Let me bring in Mr. Buru. What's your own, what's the NPP's position on this very important report that the EU has put together?
Yeah, thank you very much. I cannot state clearly as we speak now, our position on the entire report. The report is voluminous. We need to go through a lot of them. We have recommendations, 18 recommendations that they've made. Some of them are recommendations for the future. Some of them, they looked at our constitution and our laws on elections, and based on that, they are commenting on. And you realize that most of their comments are based on existing laws. And their concern really is comparing existing laws to what they think will be the best practice. You understand? So we can only listen, we can only analyze, and sometimes even correct them. That these are the existing laws. Until the laws are changed, it doesn't make it wrong or right. You understand? So there are recommendations. As for bringing everything that went on in election in this, is calling for EU to be the headmaster of our elections. Obviously, they are not with us here. They come around, have discussions, have stakeholder consultation with political parties, other civil society groups, and all that. They send limited number of people to polling stations, maybe depending on their strategy, cluster it, and depending on the sampling size that they choose. That gives them the broad understanding of whether the election was peaceful, the election was fair, the election was transparent. I disagree vehemently if one says that this election is the poorest organized elections in this country. I don't think that it is fair. I don't think that it is an assessment that can stand any scrutiny at all. One must also not forget that we're faced with a pandemic that put a lot of stress and constraints on the Electoral Commission. If you check the condition in which the Electoral Commission managed to organize its registration exercise in the midst of pandemic, it's something that, given the chance, I think that whether you like it or not, some of us were even not expecting the numbers that registered during the registration. The Electoral Commission, we hardly heard from anywhere that anybody who wanted to register was denied from registering. There wasn't any individual or citizen who couldn't register because the criteria used for identification or for requirement to register as a voter was lacking. So all the arguments that our friends from the NDC are making, yes, it's fair arguments. They will have wished that the draft of the CI will have come to, but there's no constitutional provision that requires that CEI's preparation should definitely come to IPAC for discussion before. There's no constitution or there's no law that restricts them in doing that. In any case, my friends were almost always boycotting IPAC. Even in decisions that they are part of it, they come back later and say that their rep who represented them ought not to have taken that decision. We used to have such examples that everybody is aware of. So for them to say that because the discussion did not emanate from IPAC, and as a result, the decision is flawed, I don't think that the actual implementation that did not disallow any qualified eligible voter or registrant to register as a candidate clearly vindicate the Electoral Commission, and I believe that all that they are requiring wouldn't have added anything, because what else will have birth certificate or any other document will have done? If at the end of the exercise, we realize that a good majority of the Ghanaian people who were eligible were denied as a result of the fact that they didn't have one document or the other, then we can come back and say that, we could have done that, we could have done this. So I don't think that's for us, as we speak now, to be hanging on that needless push for other documents.
Let me quote you something that the report said on an aspect of the elections that became very controversial. And for many who watched this, and the NDC has said it was the heart of the problems that we saw after the elections itself. The EC Observer says the collation process was less well organized and less transparent, often due to lack of detailed procedures. Do you agree?
To some extent, particularly at some collation centers. If you pick polling station centers, normally there is a barricade of the area. The number of people who are allowed to go there are specified and all that. But at some collation centers at the constituency level, you realize that it got to a point that our friends from the NDC were calling on their supporters to mass up at these collation centers. And these are clearly things that, if you are not very careful, creates problems. I think that the number of people that enters collation center, particularly at constituency level, is also not strictly specified. So you can have a situation where a lot more of one party's supporters occupies a collation center as against other political parties. So I agree with a position that says that we should streamline the representation at the various collation centers. And I believe that enough security and enough barricade to prevent parties, supporters from invading collation centers. Because I think that you saw in one of the collation centers in either Northeast or so, where the returning officer was about to announce the results, a rep of a political party went and snatched the speaker from him and just voted with the results. You understand? So you can see in some of the collation centers, it was chaotic. And it takes a lot of courage to be able to stand up to some of these things. So streamlining it is something that
it's key. Stay with me, Mr. Of course, the General Secretary of the NDC, MPP there. But I'll come to you shortly on I know you have some reactions, but let me bring in Mr. Brampa. Mr. Brampa, where do you stand on this report?
Yeah, good evening, Lance, and let me say good evening to JB and Mr. Otukuno. On the other hand, yes, I think that the report has given a fair reflection of what happened in the 2020 elections. And in fact, I was just reading through the 3 reports Codeo issued. In the election day, we issued a midday report, situational report. We issued end of post reports and also the final report. including the PVT results. So in reading, and even let me establish this, that every observer mission observes based on available legal principles guarding an election. You can't go to any election to observe and observe from your mind. You observe to make sure that there is conformity to established regulations that guide elections. So at any particular point in time, when you're designing your checklist, you design the checklist to reflect the rules and regulations guarding the electoral process to make sure that it conforms to it. So that's the background at which elections are observed. And when we look into the reports, it gives accurate reflection that the electoral process itself, I'm not talking about the pre-election phase, the development of documents guarding the elections. We may go into details in that and see the legal basis, whether or not IPAC is allowed to even scrutinize the Electoral Commission. What is the status of even IPAC? We may go into that. But for me, from the registration, as both co-panelists have said, to the poll, the conduct of the poll, to the declaration, everything went on. Compared to the previous elections, the only place that we had a challenge was the collation. And in fact, when you read the CODIO final report, we even recommended that we should look into the other structure of regional collation that we established. And it's contributed to some of the chaos that we had. Just like JB has said, and my brother also just hinted. So there were challenges somewhere, but fairly general reflection, I think this election was very, very good.
So it's your final verdict that the EU's report is largely an accurate reflection of what indeed happened?
Exactly so. In fact, I was just reading one of our reports as far as the election is concerned. Previously, you go to certain polling stations and there was chaos. You can't even venture to go and vote. Sometimes at the end of the elections, police and even military have to come in before we do the counting, convening it, sometimes getting into the following day, putting ballot boxes at the police station because they were killed somewhere. Yes, we had kills, one or two in other places, Techima in other places, but general reflection of the whole process, I think the elections was fair. But don't let's forget that elections, like democracy, is a process. That's why some of these reports are important. In fact, CODIO is planning a report, and I believe we've invited both MPP and NDC to share their views, to also review the process. The Electoral Commission itself has started process review from the district level to the regional level,
on the back
just
of the election,
to see what went wrong so that in future we can correct.
Yeah,
that's the essence of elections.
I'll come to recommendations
so
shortly.
As far as the CODIO report is concerned, it confirms some of the aspects of what the EU mission, observer mission has said. Yes, the negative side also confirms some of them, the abuse of incumbency and some of these things, the security deployment and other things. So I think generally the report reflects actual happenings of the day.
The EC's verdict was that it was free and fair, and that, of course, the outcome was incontrovertible. You challenged the Supreme Court. The Supreme Court affirmed that EC position. Civil society says it was free and fair. I mean, the results are accurate. CODIO, our own domestic observers, say the same thing. Now, international observers say the same thing. It appears that the NDC is standing alone in these matters.
Evans, I was particularly happy when Mr. Abrampa mentioned that the election is a process. So in judging the elections, you must judge the entire process. Now, if the process is flawed, how come the elections would be free and fair? You agree with me, I mean, as Mr. Abrampa said, that they might have done some things wrong in doing the laws and all that, but the election day, everything was okay, so it was free and fair. No, you cannot make that conclusion. You would have to put all the bits and pieces together as part of the process. Then you can make a conclusive statement on whether it was free and fair. And that is why I started by doing a step-by-step analysis of the process. So the legal framework. Then we went to registration. Now, the registration was also fraught with a lot of irregularities and security challenges. You are aware that most people were prevented from registering. A lot of people were excluded. One, from the establishment of the CI 126, which excluded the voter ID card and some other equally important identification.
17 million people also registered.
Yes.
17 million people.
So there were several others who were qualified, eligible, who could have registered, who were excluded, disenfranchised. So they didn't vote. That aside, we expected that the EU would report on some of these critical issues because you are doing a comprehensive monitoring of the elections. So all the fallouts during the registration exercise, the stabbing of Silas Shami in Banda, the shooting of the Doma Central.
Those are isolated.
This cannot be isolated. If this thing happens in any of the European countries, it's a big deal. Why is it an isolated incident in Ghana?
But it's one.
Why is it that when somebody is shot in Ghana, in Africa, then it becomes an isolated incident?
But it's isolated.
But for one person to be shot,
it's so widespread.
For one person to be shot in a registration exercise in Spain, for example, in Germany, for example, it's a big deal. It's a whole international matter. You understand? We have had a case where a church,
the reserve one line,
St. Petersburg got bent and it became an international matter.
One line in
so is it the case that when it has to do with Sub-Saharan Africa, it doesn't matter because we die anyway? No. You had a minister, a sitting minister, who was brazenly shooting in the full glare of the public and the cameras. You will not report that in such a report. As you said, this report play a very important role in the international space.
To be accurate.
So if you are not doing, international diplomacy to clean up the mess of what the government did in the elections, you will not present a report and exclude such things. And I think those are very important. Now, let's go to the elections. The election day itself. Yes, it's true. Generally, everybody went into the election aggressively to vote against the incompetence of the Akufo-Addo government. Now, the results started coming in. Before the elections, you recall that the National Security Task Force were doing some arrangements, and we had some serious concerns. We felt that the National Security Task Force was supposed to include political parties. Now, the reason why we were demanding that we get included in the National Security Task Force was that every election is basically grounded on security. And as I said earlier, you are looking at free, fair, and peaceful elections because it must be peaceful. If it is not peaceful, all the things you have done has gone waste. And peace is actually a function of security. Now, if you look at this report, I have gone through this report like 3 times. There is no aspect of this report that talks about security. Recommendations that have been made, nothing said on security. I think that is a very big flaw in the tools, the monitoring tools that was used by the EU. Perhaps, if anybody is listening, these are the things that they have to look for. Because if you come and you monitor all the processes and as Abrampa said, you establish your tools within the existing legal framework or the legal regime. But the legal regime also includes security. So if you set up your monitoring tools within that framework, why didn't you include security? Why were you not monitoring security? Bear in mind that before these elections, Ayawaso West Wagon has gone under the carpet. We have engaged the diplomatic community on this matter. We have engaged EU on Ayawaso West Wagon. This vigilante matter, they have played a very critical role in the discourse. So how is it possible that such a report will be done and security will be excluded? 8 people shot dead. It was not reported. It was not discussed. It was not mentioned.
They mentioned it. They mentioned the 5. Of the 5 people.
Evans, this is not what
they mentioned
in the introduction.
Yes.
No, obviously not.
You were expecting a more detailed.
We have lost 8 lives. In fact, 9 lives.
They say 5. They say 5.
No, including Salah. So it's misreporting because we know that there are 8 and the evidence is there. The people are there. The families are there. We are visiting them. Just recently, you saw our lawyers go to Techiman to go and meet those who were injured. They've gone to Ablekuma Central, my constituency, to meet those who are injured. A gentleman, Abbas, lost his life. A very good friend of mine, young guy, industrious guy, just lost his life. And it's gone for nothing. It will not be reported. The world will not know that people died out of course by government. And this murder, this plain, murder of innocent citizens was done by state officials. Who are paid by the taxpayers. And so our problem with this report, that it remains defective so far as it did not consider the critical things that negated the outcome. Are you
totally rejecting the entire report?
In fact, this report, if it doesn't capture the critical things that really happened in this election, would have a defective outcome and recommendations.
Yeah, but
if your report, the outcome is defective.
They met you yesterday, did they?
Yes, they met and we didn't mince words at all. We told them as it is. And we expressed our disquiet very dispassionately. Now, the reason why we did that was that in the preparation of this report, after the elections, we have engaged them, I think, about twice. And we made this point very clear, that look, this is what has happened. Even post-elections, after the death of these individuals, nothing has been done. Nobody has been prosecuted. Nobody has been arrested. You know, people are walking free.
Okay.
You understand? So these are critical issues. Let's look at those issues. So after all the engagement and all the discussion on all these security issues and all these critical matters that must engage international attention, you go exceedingly quiet, exclude them, and conclude that the Electoral Commission ran a free and fair and inclusive election.
But the EU has no skin in the game. They have no horse in the race. And so what they were doing, objective job. This is the most objective job anybody could do on elections in Ghana.
Evans, that may be your opinion.
You disagree?
No,
that their work is objective.
No, you see, it could be objective based on the tools that they were using. But I think that those were defective tools, and for that matter, it made their work not look or sound or appear independent and fair.
Wow.
And I think that is...
Those are strong words.
Yes, and I think that is problematic.
Okay, hold on for me. Forgive me. Let me bring in Mr. Buru. Mr. Buru, has the EU observer mission met you yet? Because I know they've been meeting a lot of the key political parties. They met the NDC already. Have they met you yet? And what did you say to them in the back of this report?
Yeah, we met them severally before the elections, and during the elections, we also interacted with them. We've scheduled for a meeting with them on Friday. They want to formally present their reports and also have interaction with us. So we'll be meeting them this very Friday. If they had met us before meeting the NDC, Otokuno will have added it to his concerns about the elections, about us arising out of the election. I think that he should relax. You've lost the election and you've lost fairly. So just go back to the drawing table. Let us look at some of the critical issues that they raise.
Yeah.
Issues about funding, for instance, of political parties and campaign activities. They raised very, very salient points about the need to set a limit, the need to be able to monitor it, the need to have a mechanism of determining what is excess of funding.
Can I read that for my audience? Can I read what you're saying for my audience so that they follow you? They say, adopt a law on campaign expenditure and finance to enhance the overall transparency and accountability of political finance. The law to include establishing disclosure requirements of incomes and expenses for both parties and candidates, and limits on expenditure and donations, including for in-kind donations. Introduce effective oversight, sanctions and enforcement mechanisms that include a timely publication of all campaign finance reports, including online. Do you agree with these?
Fantastic. I have raised this question over years about the fact that our political party funding law is inadequate. It's inadequate because you are not mandated to even disclose who gave you what in terms of cash, in terms of donation, and their background of the people. So as I sit here at headquarters, anybody can walk here, give or donate any amount. I'm not even required to take his details, and nobody is even mandates me or I'm obligated to report on individual contribution to political parties. The only problem, the only thing that the political party law frowns on is the contribution of foreigners. And to what extent do they even check whether foreigners are contributing to our political party campaigns or political party funding or not? Because we are not doing in-depth disclosure of who got what or who brought what. It is a flaw in our political party funding law that we need to look at. You understand? In terms of even reporting, to what extent are political parties audited? Not by their own internal auditing structures, but the Electoral Commission having the mandate to audit political parties. And as we speak now, I know a lot of political parties reports are just reports of their national headquarters activities. no political party in this country have enough structure in place to account for the entire funding of their political party, right from polling station to the national level. You understand? So this is a major thing that I think that Otukuno will be interested in, rather than rehashing what they said a lot in the campaign platforms that didn't earn them any votes anyway. You understand? So it's important that we look at it. It's important that we come back to look at in-depth analysis of what our political funding laws are. Most often when discussions on funding comes, we normally tend to rely on whether there should be state funding of political parties or not. And at the end of the day, when you are in government, sometimes you are cold on agreeing, or sometimes you agree in public that there must be state funding of political parties. In terms of its implementation, no government has been able to implement it. My view is that the capacity of political parties themselves, their ability to put in place an accounting structure that will account for all activities of political parties in order to enable us to know who brought what. And that will determine the limits to which political parties can spend, whether in government or in opposition. It is a major area that I think that we need broader understanding of what our political parties' activities are, and how best to put in place laws that will bite. You understand? Because from what I see and from how we've operated our political parties over years, I can tell you that most reports or most audited reports that we send to Electoral Commission are headquarters reports.
Yeah.
Okay, with national elections like this, you have a few, but hardly will you see any of the audited accounts of political parties, including expenditure from parliamentary candidates.
That appears to be a very big deal, and I see it in the report. I'll come back to Mr. Otukuno on his point and to get his view on this just after this break. We'll be back in a minute, and I'll also hear from Mr. Brampa. My guest on PM Express tonight, John Buru, the MPP General Secretary, Paul Nana Kabana Brampa, Mensa, the Senior Programs Officer at the Ghana Center for Democratic Development, CDD, Peter Boma Otukuno is the NDC Deputy General Secretary. Your quick comment on the campaign finance proposals that had been made by the EU in this report?
Well, and that is why I said that perhaps maybe the EU may have to, look at the monitoring tools. They shouldn't come in with preconceived expectations and look at things that is of interest to them. They must look at things that is of interest to the people, because I believe they are doing the report for the people of this country, most importantly, before anybody else would want to use this document to make any step towards Ghana. It's very important. If you are looking at the people of Ghana, you will not be focusing on political party funding. You will focus on the safety of the people, whether the people had the chance to exercise their franchise in peace. Whether there was inclusion. I
think they've determined that that was not a problem.
Well, whether there was inclusion, and that's where we have the problem. That's why we have questioned every single available analysis they have done in respect of the key areas that will give you free and fair elections. Now, for example, look at civil society organizations and international observers in the election. I recall we had a problem with the Electoral Commission on the selection of observers, because we had reports from several domestic observers who wanted to deploy people to monitor the elections, and they didn't grant them accreditation. And we made this, concerns loudly available to the Electoral Commission and the international community, including the EU. We said several reports, we showed them the letters of various organizations that had requested accreditation to observe the elections, and they were refused. And that is the first time the Electoral Commission will refuse a civil society organization an observer accreditation. And I think that is problematic. If you exclude people, you give the accreditation to only a few people, then what it means is that you are reducing the assessment, the monitoring, the impact, and the outcome that will be given after the elections. And that is why we are having this report, which I think ostensibly It's a report just crafted to clean the broken international image of President Akufo-Addo. But
I mean, the EU cannot be complicit in that.
Be that as it may.
Why would the EU do that?
Well, I mean,
they have no.
I'm making this judgment. I'm making this conclusion.
But that's an unfair judgment.
No, I'm making this conclusion based on the key issues that matters most to the people of this country that we all saw, you and I saw, and debated and discussed.
That the EU will whitewash Akufo-Addo's image. Why will they ever do that? I mean,
well, perhaps when you get them,
that cannot be supported by the facts.
Perhaps when you get them, you may want to ask them. But I want.
No, but you are alleging.
I want to touch on.
You agree that there are no facts about this?
No, I'm saying that when you get them, you may want to ask them why. But I'm giving you the facts that look.
But the facts that
this report excluded the security situation, which was the worst ever in our election history. This report excluded how the Electoral Commission threw all caution to the wind and was so biased, openly biased, in running the electoral process, excluding people, preventing people, and disenfranchising people. I have not spoken about the issue of SAL. The Electoral Commission knew very well that they were disenfranchising them.
But they
were denying them representation in Parliament. Yes, they knew that. So you see, all these matters which flaws the process, which leads to a free and fair and peaceful election, are not captured in the report. So if you do not capture them and you do not talk about them, you cannot conclude by saying that you have had a free, fair, and peaceful election. Particularly the word peaceful, because this election was not peaceful. Now look at the
I want to bring in.
Look at the post-election political temperature, which I think is equally important.
Very briefly, and they also spoke about the outcome of the Supreme Court verdict, which they thought was also
exactly the post-elections Supreme Court verdict. What happened in Parliament, which is equally important, but more important than political funding. Parliament, for the first time, had a military invasion on the floor of Parliament.
I need to bring out Brampa because of time. Let me get a Brampa in.
Supreme Court. Let
me get a Brampa in. Mr. Brampa, so tell me, it's also one of the recommendations, introduce effective sanctioning mechanisms against the misuse of state resources, including administrative and security apparatus during the election period. They do this because they found in the report that the incumbent party did not only abuse incumbency, but also misuse of state resources. What do you say to that?
But when your producer called me, I did suggested to her that she gets a speaker from GII, Ghana Integrity Initiative, because they did special monitoring of abuse of incumbency on these elections, and they would have been a better institution to comment on that.
But broadly speaking, would a legislative intervention fix the problem?
Yes, that said. We did monitor abuse of incumbency twice, I think 2008 and 2012. From that, I'm not surprised the EU monitoring, if indeed they did actual monitoring on that, also came up with a report indicting same, because in the 2008 and 2012 elections, we did also find the same thing. So it looks as if a government in power sometimes use their influence against the other candidates they are competing with. So, but I mean, when you are talking about abuse of incumbency, you need specifics. In our 2012-20 elections, we were reporting with even videos, pictures and videos of programs that some of these things were happening. You remember we reported when there was some parties were distributing matches. And when you open it, you find some money in the matchbox. We had videos and everything on that. But I said, well, I'm hesitant to comment because I don't have specifics. I don't have examples. I'm just commenting from a previous monitoring that we did.
Broadly,
that's the whole thing. But that said, I think it's become a canker in our politics. And that also buttresses the monetization and increase the cost of politics that we have. You remember the research that we did in cost of politics and the amount that political parties and candidates spend in elections. These all come together to talk about that. That's why I also side with JB that we need to look specifically into cost of politics and political party funding. Including how they report on their funding. I remember my executive director, Prof. Prempe, in one of his speeches said, it's not only having the Electoral Commission monitoring political parties specifically on auditing and funding. It's either we have a special department within the Electoral Commission to do that, And before we can institute better monitoring on political parties funding and auditing, as JB said, we need to also have a structure to help them build capacity.
Yeah, I mean,
institute better structure in the political parties so that it's like give and take.
Yeah, it's unfortunate that this is one of those issues that
then we use that to monitor you or audit you. I think it's a problem that we need to look to as a country. If you
need some more time to explore in greater detail. As they meet you, we'll get some more details on this. But I need to give 30 seconds strictly to JB to respond to the point that his friend Otokuno made about this whitewashing the image of Nado in the international community. JB, very quickly, briefly.
I think that is an unfortunate statement, and political party big like NDC should not double in such unfortunate and unsubstantiated allegations. I think that is unfair. and I don't see why they cannot run away from such behavior. It's unfair. If you look at the entire report, you clearly see that they are raising issues that are very critical. And I'm surprised he's not interested in funding. Yes, there's no doubt, because they can't even account for what even votes that they were voted for. They can't even account for it. So I'm not surprised. Yeah. But it's important for us. Look at a statement that they made about the limiting role of NCA, for instance. It's a very, very strong point. They think that licensing of broadcasting licenses and radio stations should be hived from NCA and
given to the NMC. And in fact, that's one of those areas that we still see some NDC stations suffering from. And I'm grateful, Mr. Buru. Mr. Tokun, I'm grateful that you joined me. Unfortunately, time just ran out on us on this. I'm pretty sure as they meet you, and the other parties will get to have a bigger conversation again on this matter. Mr. Tukun, I'm grateful that you joined me. Always good to have you join us on this. Enjoy the rest of your evening, ladies and gentlemen.